it's true. I mean, if you are sleep deprived, you are cognitively drunk. So he's not even exaggerating. If you pull an all-nighter, for example, and then you get on the road, you can't even perceive how compromised you are cognitively.
That was Dr. Kristen Holmes today on the Running Effect podcast, back on the podcast. And guys, I want to start out by saying this. Out of any episode I've done in the past few months, if you listen to any, it is this one. Stick to the end. You will learn things that you can directly apply into your running and into your life that will deeply impact you and leave you away with tangible tools that you can apply directly into your life, into your running, that will make you a better runner, a better person as a result. And that is my deep desire with this platform, is to do those two things. And there's no better guest who articulates the things that need to be done, who breaks down science, who breaks down philosophy, who breaks down psychology, like Dr. Holmes. She's remarkable. If you don't know her, she's the global head of human performance and principal scientist at Whoop, with a Ph.D. in psychology from the University of Queensland. She's helping athletes, executives, and everyday performers unlock their best through the science of recovery, sleep, HRV, and a whole plethora of different things. I'll keep this intro short for the simple purpose being I want you to hear Dr. Holmes and her wisdom way better than anything I'd say in this intro. But if you're deeply impacted by this conversation, shoot me a DM, shoot me an email. I want to see your thoughts from this. I'd deeply appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts with me on this. Give us a 5-star review. It takes 3 seconds. Hit the follow button so you don't miss more conversations in the future, and share it with a friend. That is the easiest way in which we can have impact. With all those notes aside, enjoy this deep dive conversation with the one and only, the legend herself, Dr. Kristen Holmes. Dr. Kristen Holmes, welcome back to the Running Effect podcast. In the history, 600 plus episodes. That was one of my favorite episodes we've done. It's always a fun time when you can sit down with someone and walk out of that conversation feeling like a better version of yourself, more joyful and full of science that you can implement into your everyday life. And so I'm excited for round 2. First off, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing so well, Dominic. It's really good to see you, and just such an honor to be able to chat with you today. And I feel like we're kindred spirits. So I know this will be a good one.
Something that has happened since we last spoke with each other is you've launched, I believe, after our last podcast, you've launched your own podcast. I think it's called Science and Soul. And I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe you had on one of my friends, Lucy Davis, on your podcast.
Yes.
And you've had on a lot of other incredible people, specifically females, in and around the sport and sports world. I'm really curious to dive into that. For you, off the top of your head, what are some of the top insights you feel like you've gleaned from your remarkable guests?
Oh, that's such a beautiful question. And Lucy was actually on the Whoop podcast. But both platforms, we feature a lot of really badass female athletes, Lucy being one of them, Annie, Dave's daughter, Meg Saunders, Rachel Vickery. Yeah, just a lot of, I think, women who, the common thread across these women is they care very deeply about empowering others. And it's so genuine and authentic. And so I think that for me, that definitely comes through loud and clear in the conversation, is just this really authentic desire to want to have an impact, and have really, as their own platforms have grown, just I think with that having an increasing, feeling of responsibility to represent themselves in ways that are kind of honest and full of integrity. And so I think that's what's impressed me most, honestly, is how genuine that really is. And I think the other piece that's really interesting is just this N of one. I think they all kind of talk from this, their own lived experience, and I think, whether that correlates with your own experience or not is kind of irrelevant. It's just this idea of looking at your life more intentionally and having a level of introspection that allows you to step out into the world with firmer persuasion, and I think that they really embody that. And I think as a result, empower others.
Someone like Lucy, I got to spend some time with because we both work with the same company, BPN, and it was my first time visiting their headquarters. And I was in good shape, but I wasn't in Lucy Davis shape. And she insisted I join her for her High Rocks workout. And ladies and gentlemen out there, generally you shouldn't try your first workout in something with the former world record holder.
Yeah,
I
no.
survived, but I nearly puked. And an insight I had with Lucy was just like, it's remarkable being surrounded by someone whose life is truly centered around their goals and their impact and literally getting every ounce of human potential out of themselves. And I think, as I love to say, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And so I was deeply inspired by that experience with her.
So
What's your
well
experience with a Lucy or someone else? Or even like you were a coach back in the day. We talked about that last time on the podcast, where we are living in 2025 in an era where we now have the tools where you really can optimize everything to the 1%. And 10, 20 years ago, we didn't have the science, we didn't have the research, we didn't have the tools that allowed us to become, I don't want to call us robots, but you know what I mean? We have the ability. There's no excuse now is what I'm trying to say. There's no excuse to not be healthy. There's no excuse to not be fit.
yeah.
There's no excuse to not chase after big things and big goals.
I think if you have the education and resources, you have a responsibility as a citizen to manage your health proactively. And that could be kind of maybe a controversial take, but I believe that with every bit of my soul. And if you think that, that, oh, it's your body, you can do what you want. Well, your health actually impacts everyone around you. And so again, if you have the education, you have the resources, you have a responsibility to take care of your health. To your point, we don't have to guess really anymore. There is plenty of tools and programs, and there are lots of doctors who specialize in getting people on a better track. So yeah, I mean, I just feel like we have responsibility as citizens to it doesn't mean that you have to chase optimization or anything like that, but just at a basic level, we should be doing everything that we can to minimize the burden on others. And I think when we consider our responsibility to our fellow citizen, it becomes pretty obvious to me that one of the core pieces of that responsibility is health.
I know you're a sports scientist and not necessarily a psychologist, but I know you understand.
Oh, no, my PhD is in psychology, and my master's
absolutely wrong. Perfect question for you.
Is a hybrid
Perfect question for you.
And exercise phys. Yeah.
Okay, amazing. I'm excited to ask you this question. People, a lot of people, including myself at times, recognize that we need change, recognize that we can be healthier, recognize that we can sleep more or drink less or whatever your vice is if you're listening. But so few people actually take change in that area. They accept the truth, but there's a bridge that's not there between accepting the truth and taking the action. What do you think from your experience motivates people on a psychological level to hear what you said there and say, okay, I actually need to take action, rather than what Dr. Holmes said is true, but okay, I'm just going to keep living my life the same way after I close out this podcast?
Well, you have to tap into your why. That's really important. And I think often, if we really zoom out, I think oftentimes people can want transformation, but they don't necessarily know what's on the other side of that transformation. So I think there's this moment of kind of uncertainty that is what can hold people back. And I think the other piece is just knowing where to start can feel kind of overwhelming. And that's where, again, if you have the resources, seeking the support of someone who can help you identify, what's going well, Where are the opportunities for me to shore things up? Where can I get the biggest bang for my buck? Where can I get the most return? What is the lowest barrier to entry? Right. And then just kind of slowly picking a couple that feel good to you and starting there. To me, that's the place to begin. And in knowing that, it's not easy to do it alone. And I think seeking support is important. But I think also knowing where to start and having someone to kind of help you figure that out is really big. And I think for folks who are just starting a change journey, you often have to rethink your identity, right? Who do I want to be in the world, right? You have to kind of shed that outdated version of yourself. And that also is scary. And that comes with second and third order effects, right? To the other people oftentimes in our lives are very resistant to change, right? They don't want to see people change and evolve and grow. But I think that is a really good signal that those are probably not the people in your life. Those are probably people in your life that you need to rethink, right? Because I think part of human health and happiness is evolving and growing, and that often means rethinking who you want to be in the world, and then aligning your values and your behaviors with that aspirational self. So it takes some auditing, and it takes kind of sitting down and really thinking about, okay, how do I feel about the course of my life? And then really understanding, okay, what is the laundry list of behaviors that are supporting that version, my aspirational self? What are the laundry list of behaviors that are not supporting that aspirational self? Okay, where do I start? Which ones can I start tackling? Because at the end of the day, that is how you build integrity within yourself. You practice being the person you aspire to be in the world, right? And every single time you, take that step and you are practicing living your values, you build confidence, right? And so that's kind of a rough outline of I would where I kind of see some of the challenges associated with behavior change and some of the solutions.
You said something excellent in there in regards to community. And I find that that is the biggest thing that holds people back from their potential in all aspects of life. It's the
Yeah.
inability to sit in humility
Mm.
and accept the fact of science and nature that you become who you surround yourself with. And it is a deeply painful process to refine people who have been in your life for long periods of time if they are not ultimately what's good for you. But everything you want is on the other side of that. And simply put, I'm trying to think what she is. I think she's a sports psychologist. She's worked with a lot of the top professional marathoners, a lot of the top NCAA teams who have won championships. I don't know if she came up with this term, but she said it to me on a podcast once, which is simple phrase: words create worlds. And if we're around people who are not speaking the right words into us and over us, they will create worlds in our head. And just as that can be a negative, it can be a positive. It was a very intentional choice. I started surrounding myself with remarkably successful people in 8th grade. Well, that's how I set myself up to not go to college and be a successful entrepreneur. And it could have gone the other way, right? And so it's having the humility to sit down and say, okay, I'm scared about what I'm going to uncover through this introspective process, but I need to have the courage to take the uncomfortable step to do what is ultimately best for myself and my future.
That's beautifully said. I think that that word courage, it's like not easy, to go in a new direction, but that's often, I think, the price of growth, and the price of kind of getting to a place where you can truly be happy. And I totally agree. There's nothing more important than surrounding yourself with people who are going to nurture your values, and support, the behaviors that ladder up to who you say you want to be in the world, and keep you accountable when you're behaving in a way that's counter, to the things that you say you care about. And that's like the beauty of being on a team, right? Is like, high performing team, right? There's that polarization, right? As soon as you kind of deviate from the norms of the group, like you either get pulled back in, or you know what, you're not on the team anymore. It's like kind of ruthless, but that's I think the feature of a high performing team is that you have this really stark polarization. And that's kind of what I think, if I were to take a beautiful kind of feature of a high performance team and kind of put it into like the regular Jane and Joe life, like that's actually what you're looking for in your own life, is people who are just ruthlessly there to support your values and your goals and your dreams, and help keep you on track when you fall off.
Oh, I could talk about this stuff all day. You said
I know,
something
it's
earlier
so
on there that was the word easy. And I just challenge people a lot of times, including myself in my own internal dialogue. We want everything to be easy, but when was life about easiness? And I will even go so far as to say, when was life about happiness? I think you and I would both live wildly different lives if we were simply chasing happiness. I would say, at least me, myself, I'm chasing fulfillment and I'm chasing impact. And the roads to get there a lot of times are very hard and messy. And that's the very thing that brings about meaningful fulfillment. You'll look at the Chicago Marathon this weekend. People who are excited about hitting their goals are excited because it was hard. And if it was easy and if they knew that they were going to achieve that goal, it wouldn't be meaningful and they wouldn't really care, which is why if we do a workout we know we can do, we don't think about it twice. But we can't stop bragging in our group chats to friends when we do a workout that was like, wow, that was so hard. I dug in so hard that 8th rep and I wasn't sure if I was going to finish, but I finished and I'm so happy and proud of myself. And I
Yeah.
think we live in this world where we want everything to be easy. And it's like, when was anything that was fulfilling or meaningful easy? To make something meaningful, the road to get there has to be hard. And one of my favorite sayings in regards to groups and tribes and all of that is, I forget where I saw this, but I think I saw it in an Instagram reel. The person was talking about a friend coming up to them. They had undergone like deep change. And the friend said, like, you've changed. And this guy was like, that's the whole point. And I was just like, that's great. That's so well said. He's like,
I
that's the
love
point.
that.
The point is that I changed, you know?
I love that. Yeah. Yeah, that's so good. I definitely, I feel like there's more information about happiness, right? Which is good, because I think it's an important framework. Because to your point, I think if you're chasing happiness, you're relying on kind of external events to fulfill you, right? And I think the realization that happiness is really internal. Like your peace is internal, and I think when what you just listed were just your values, right? And you're chasing alignment, right, with your core values, growth and impact, right? And those are two of my core values as well. I want to grow, I want to evolve, I want to um, learn, and I want to create impact in the world, right? So those two values like really drive my behaviors day to day, right? And the more alignment we have, the more fulfilled we are, the more joy we can bring to the world, right? And the less dissonance we have. And I will just say a comment on, as a psychologist, is a comment on dissonance. It's not bad. When we feel, the more clear you are about your life, when things actually start to go off track, you feel this real, strong sense of cognitive dissonance, and you can feel this tension internally. And that is not bad. Like, that is just a signal that, maybe I need to change. Maybe right now my life needs to shift in some way. And that's just a source of insight that is really powerful. So paying attention to those cues is really important. But in order to even get to that place, you have to understand, in the first place, what do you actually care about? Who do you actually aspire to be in the world? And do you have a life? Is your life set up in a way that allows you to practice being that person? Do you have the right people, the right places, the right things in your life? And I think that discussion with yourself, that dialogue with yourself, requires some level of quiet, and some level of removing distraction, so you can, have time to like sit and think. And that's I think where we really struggle as a society, right? We don't carve out that space.
Constant stimulation 24/7 from these things.
I know
Yeah,
it's.
this reminds me of a story from, his name is Patrick Bet David. He's a podcaster, businessman. pretty big on social media, and he had this great framework that I deeply loved. He said most people only change when their circumstance like dictates that they change. So like a girl broke up with them, or they lose a job, or shit hits the fan, and they have this existential crisis that kind of forces them to change. And he goes, that's not bad. But he goes, the best people, the people who actually go and do remarkable things in life, are the people who reinvent themselves every like 60 to 90 days. And every single time that you meet them and you talk to them 60 to 90 days or half a year or a quarter of a year, you're like, oh, wow, like you're different. I feel something different about you. There's a different sort of energy. And I think I fall short of that a lot, but it's a goal I strive for, is like something I tell family members. This was actually the last thing I think I said to my parents when I was moving to Austin out of high school. My final words was, I will be a better version of myself next time you see me. And I think that's a great ideal to strive for. I'll say that to people when I know I won't see them for a week. I'll be like, I'll try to be a better person next time I see you, and you do the same. That constant reinvention without having outside circumstances force you to do that, I think is such a powerful spot that will get you so much further ahead of most people in life.
Yeah. And I think how you operationalize that is via curiosity, and I think that's like such a superpower. If you can stay open and curious, you will grow and you will evolve, and I think in a way that's really organic and native, and it's almost like without even trying, just even Dominic sitting with you today, I'm going to get off this call in however long, and I'm a better person from having chatted with you, and it's just, and it's really like we have all of the like these mini moments of growth, and opportunity to be curious and present are baked into our day. We just have to notice that it's happening. And this is work that I really, I talk about the women who I've spoken to on my podcast. Dr. Ellen Langer, she's a psychologist from Harvard, and she spent her whole life, studying mindfulness. And she said that, being mindful is just literally noticing. And after my conversation with her, I kind of like got away from, these like really kind of structured, rigid mindfulness moments. And I just like have made being mindful a way of being in the world. Like I'm just constantly just trying to notice and trying to be kind of present in that noticing. And, and in it, when you have that mental framework, you don't engage with your phone as much. You're more engaged with the world, which actually is a little depressing, because then you notice actually how disengaged people are from each other. Yeah, I've been thinking deeply about this, but really, I think being mindful, and evolving and growing is a way of being in the world, and it's there for all of us, which is, I think, so exciting.
That's so good. I think one of the best insights I came across this past week was this simple proposal, which was, what if life is about experiencing?
Yeah.
And if you ask that question, if you're a little depressed one day, or you have a hard day, or someone's shitty to you on the road and honks at you, or whatever or the massive highs of life, like it's all in the context of experiencing life and experiencing life to the fullness. And yeah, we're going down a deep rabbit hole, but I love it. And I'm sure a lot of the podcasts you do are deeply scientific, so I'll keep exploring this rabbit hole. My family had some miscarriages in the past year, 2 years. And through deep reflection of that, one of the insights I had that I never even thought was an insight I'd ever come across was, you go to funerals for people who have lived full lives, and you appreciate and you celebrate the life that was and everything that they did. What was different in those situations was, it was, in my mourning, it was mourning the life that never was, and the fact that they never even got to experience bad feelings. And that reframed a lot of my bad feelings, which is like, well, the fact that, some days I'm sad, or some days I'm angry or depressed, that shows that I'm alive. Those emotions show that I'm alive. And the people who never even got to exist, which the statistics of us existing as uniquely us is 400 trillion to 1. So we're the lucky ones who get to do this life. maybe it's not also bad, even the bad emotions, because it shows that we exist and we have the chance to play the game of life. And that's a deep privilege that I don't think we truly realize how special it is, and we probably take for granted on a daily basis.
I asked Dr. Robert Waldinger, who has been involved with the longest study on human happiness. I asked him what it means to be human, and he told me experiencing the range of emotions. And, obviously it had an impact on me because I can remember it, it's stuck in my brain, but I could not agree with your assessment more. And, I think, Robert's, I think take on that was really powerful in that, you know, it's what differentiates us as human beings, is being able to experience deep heartache in pain and grief, but also awe and joy. And, and I think leaning into that is a gift, and we need to embrace it. And I think to your other point, it's not always going to be perfect, but again, like just having that perspective, like, wow, I'm grateful that I actually am in a position to be able to feel this emotion. Because I think that means that your heart's open. And when your heart's open, you are in a position to be generous and loving. And, so I think it's kind of a really beautiful flywheel when you can embrace emotions, and lean into them.
100%. I also think it takes some seriousness that we as humans put on our lives off of us, where it's like, if you're racing a 5K or a marathon this weekend, it's like, meh, if I fail, whatever. Like, yeah, I care and I should care, but like, it's such a small moment in the blip of time on a floating rock, and it really doesn't matter. And it
Yeah.
matters to you, and that's beautiful. But at the end of the day, we take ourselves so seriously as humans, including myself. I take myself way too seriously. But
Totally.
when we have these conversations, I think a beautiful reflection I have is like, yeah, you can just exist, and you don't, not everything has to be perfect, and you don't have to put all this pressure on you, even though everyone feels like their life is like, it is unique, but everyone feels like they're going through something like for the absolute first time, and no one's ever undergone it or experienced it. And it's like,
That's so true.
no, you're good. You'll be fine.
And
And there's this running analogy I love that I think you'll appreciate. And it's regardless whether you succeed or fail, whatever you do, you'll still tie your shoes the same the next morning.
yeah, nothing could be truer. I love that.
Within the concept of accepting our existence, there are certain things we can do to improve our existence. One of those we covered last time we spoke, and I want to double tap on in this conversation, is the subject of sleep, which I don't think can ever be talked about enough.
I know.
I'll start us off here, and you can take it wherever you want to go. A lot of people say, and a lot of people think, I'll sleep when I'm dead. How would you reply to that?
Oh gosh. Well, you're going to die a lot sooner. And there's just such a huge body of evidence to support that statement. I think the problem with sleep deprivation, and we see this in our research, is it just doesn't impact me, my sleep debt. Okay, so being underslept and having short or deficient sleep is going to impact every human I interact with. And we saw this in a study that we did with McKinsey over the course of 6 months. We looked at executives. So this was part of the McKinsey leadership program. And we had 79 leaders in that study, and we were monitoring their sleep and their resting physiology. And we were also studying their direct reports. And what we were measuring with the direct reports is their level of psychological safety. So how safe do these direct reports feel in the presence of their leader? And so what we did to measure this is, after meetings that the direct reports had with their leader, we would send them a survey, and there's kind of randomly generated, and they would fill out a psychological safety survey. And basically what we found is that there was a statistically strong relationship between the psychological safety of the direct reports and the sleep of the leader. So the more sleep debt the leader accrued, the less psychologically safe the direct report felt. So psychological safety doesn't just matter in the workplace, right? It matters in every single interaction. You can imagine if you are underslept and you are kind of abiding by this, oh, I'll sleep when I'm dead. Well, I can guarantee you that your children feel less psychologically safe around you, as does your partner, as does your mom and dad and brother. So sleep debt just doesn't impact you, it impacts everyone. And then I would also say that there's a safety component. You become less safe on the road, operating equipment, right? And then just your own safety, right? You will increase your chance of illness and injury. Again, the burden that you're putting on the people who love you and society. So, I could go on and on. But, sleeping when you're dead, that's really short-sighted. And I think totally dismisses the impact sleep deprivation has at a societal level.
I read in Dr. Matthew Walker's book, and I don't have the study memorized, unfortunately, but he walks me through, or the reader through, the effects of poor sleep in relation to like being pre-diabetic was one that stood out to me. And then he related it as well to actually being less safe on the road than drivers with alcohol in their system. Sometimes I think there's benefit in taking examples to the extreme. I think this is an example of that.
No, and it's true. I mean, if you are sleep deprived, you are cognitively drunk. So he's not even exaggerating. I mean, that is, he's making a perfectly rational abstraction, that I think holds in the data. So yeah, I mean, if you pull an all-nighter, for example, and then you get on the road, you can't even perceive how compromised you are cognitively. And that's what is so sneaky about sleep deprivation is in David Dignis' lab at University of Pennsylvania found this, that, for they looked at various bouts of, or various levels of sleep deprivation, and what was consistent across these various levels of sleep deprivation is that people can't perceive their own physical, mental, and emotional declines. People kind of think they're fine. In the same way that when you're drunk, you're like, oh, I can drive, I'm fine. That's because you can't perceive how messed up you are, right? And it's the same thing with sleep. So it becomes, to Dr. Walker's point, dangerous, right? And so, I think there's certainly that component. And then again, I think the emotional component as well. Like you are not gonna, and this is why we see psychological safety move around in the presence of sleep deprivation, is because you just don't emote the same. When your eyes are tired, it's hard to be empathetic and be compassionate. So even if in your mind, I'm being empathetic, I'm being compassionate, I'm being kind and tolerant, people can't see that.
Wow.
So, sleep is just sneaky. And it will slowly degrade your performance and your health. So yes, absolutely, short sleep. Just one night of bad sleep is going to impact your fasting glucose. So you will have higher, even if nothing changes, totally independent of anything you're putting in your body, sleep will change your fasting glucose levels. They will be higher if you've experienced a short sleep. So it does impact you at a metabolic level, and indeed, people with who I think are more vulnerable to type 2 diabetes. Certainly a feature of that is poor, inconsistent sleep.
Do we have a definition for sleep deprivation, or when you say like a bad night of sleep? Could we define that for the listener? Because I think it's a lot more it's a lot. I think people think like, oh, sleeping 2 hours, like it's a lot more closer to what a lot of people do than I think they realize.
So, I mean, for us, I'm obviously principal scientist with a very large technology company, so we're collecting physiological data 24/7. So a lot of the data that I'm using in my research is the data that we're collecting from our members. So how we define sleep deprivation is basically what we tell you you should be getting based on all of your individual kind of what we assess is basically your personal sleep need. So basically what you need versus what you got, that's kind of our sleep depth metric. So if we say for kind of optimal restoration based on everything that we know about you is, let's say, 7 hours and 42 minutes in bed, but you spend 6 hours and 42 minutes in bed, you have about an hour of sleep deprivation. So, it's relatively loose, but that we see in studies that this metric of sleep debt, what you got versus what you need, actually correlates to things like psychological safety. It correlates to things like mental control. In that study with McKinsey, we also looked at executive function measured by two kind of performance metrics, a Stroop and an NBAC, which measures executive control, executive function. And basically we saw for every 45 minutes of sleep debt, they got exponentially stupider. So 5 to 10% less mental control the next day. So, our metric has kind of been, validated, through the back door, looking at how sleep debt actually correlates with some of these, kind of independent markers of performance. So that's one way of thinking about sleep deprivation. A classic, in sleep kind of science, we would think about it as, there's essentially these standard recommendations that people need around 8 hours, 8 to 9 hours of sleep in order to kind of fully restore. And, what we're finding is that that's actually quite variable, not wildly variable, but, some people who sleep are more efficient sleepers probably need a little bit less time in bed. We also see in the data that people who exercise regularly generally need and spend less time in bed. And I think the theory there is that folks who are moving throughout the day, who are exercising and are relatively healthy, probably have less systemic inflammation than individuals who are not moving. So we see this really strong relationship between a high BMI, low movement, and time in bed, in that those folks spend more time in bed. We also published data looking at mental health and these markers of kind of sleep and resting physiology and activity. So we looked at just this big data set, and what we found is that people who, not surprisingly, move less, sleep more, have basically less positive psychological functioning, kind of more mental health issues. So their perceived stress is higher. They score worse on depression scales. So, movement really matters as it relates to sleep, and kind of, getting to a place where you're minimizing your own personal sleep debt. There are a lot of factors that go into that. Circadian alignment is a big one, right? In order to kind of get the efficiency, that quality of sleep, you want to have really stable sleep-wake consistency or sleep-wake regularity. We see that independent of sleep duration. This is one of the primary kind of drivers of all-cause mortality, is how consistent your sleep is. So to me, that's a really big one. And we can talk about how to get consistent sleep, because I think backing into that is its own kind of conversation, and one that I think people don't think about, because people can leave this podcast and be like, oh my God, I am going to double down. I'm going to become a good sleeper, but don't actually know how to do that. So if you want to talk about that, I'm happy to. But yeah, that's the kind of overarching kind of idea around sleep debt.
Thanks for sharing all of that. I think there are two buckets. There's the normal person health and wellness bucket, and then there's the athlete bucket. To tackle the first bucket, I don't know if you're familiar with them, but Dr. Casey and Callie Means, I've appreciated a lot of their work. They wrote a book called Good Energy, I think is what it's called.
Yeah.
And an idea they've enlightened me to, that I've appreciated, is the fact that, people will experience these symptoms in their everyday life. They'll go to a doctor, they'll get on a drug. I'm curious from your perspective, whether it's someone who's depressed, or someone who is struggling with like PCOS, if you're a female, or someone who might be pre-diabetic, how these issues, like you look at your lifestyle and you're sleeping 6 hours and you're drinking, 4 Cokes a day and alcohol, and you're not eating nutritious foods, and you're not working out, and you're not sleeping enough, and how we don't go to our actual lifestyle choices first and seek to solve those before actually seeking to, get on medication. Obviously there's a time and place for medication, but get on medication, or all these sort of things. How do you view, sleep and other behaviors in relation to actually solving and a lot of times being the root problem to a lot of chronic diseases?
There's no question that lifestyle is the biggest driver of disease, and we're learning this. And I think where it's hard is I think people don't want to admit that they're sabotaging their own health. So I think that it's just hard, right? Like we're kind of wired to protect ourselves, right, from like feeling bad about what we're doing, and our brains are just kind of wired in a way where, we try to rationalize everything that we're doing. But I think when you peel it back, there's no question that when we look at, you know, things like cardiovascular disease and, reproductive health and, uh, metabolic health, and, there's no question that you can get 90% of the way there with lifestyle, right? And we're seeing genetics play less and less of an actual role in disease, onset and progression. So, it's really our lifestyle that we need to come to terms with. And, I will say that, medications can be a great on ramp to get to help facilitate change and get someone on the right track. I think GLP-1s are a really good example of reducing a lot of the noise that's associated with, that works against your ability to make change. So I really think those drugs there's a lot of promise, but there's also big downsides, right, with GLP-1. So my team published a paper recently. So I've been inside these type of data, but I just will say, behavior change is hard, right? And especially when you're dealing with lots of different health issues, it can be hard to get going. But there is no question, if you can work on stabilizing your circadian rhythms and getting those aligned, right? Because usually the big precursor to a lot of disease, and kind of getting into this allostatic overload, is circadian misalignment. That's kind of at the foundation and at the heart of a lot of issues, certainly metabolically, and usually starts there, right? Is circadian alignment. We don't have to look any further than shift workers, right, to see that this misalignment causes all sorts of havoc, right, on to one's health. So I think from my perspective, you want to sleep better, get circadian alignment. If you want to, pay down your risk of illness and injury, circadian alignment, like that's kind of the place to start, in my view.
And
that's not being prescribed, to be super clear.
For sure.
No
On the athlete side of things, I'm reading a study here from NCAA Sports Science Institute. On average, in-season student athletes are getting 6.27 hours of sleep nightly. That's crazy to me.
That's my paper.
Is it really?
Yeah. Is it with UCLA?
I would have to read further, but it might be.
Yeah.
Anyways, well, that's crazy.
Yeah.
That I literally was Googling on my phone, like, what's the average amount that in? Okay, well, there you go. That's amazing.
Yeah, we published that with it was NCAA kind of characteristics of sleep. So basically, it was just basically a descriptive study looking at just basically sleep characteristics of NCAA athletes. We had 270 in that study. And we did it in collaboration with UCLA. That was so funny that you randomly pulled up that study.
I literally looked up like a few days. I was like, what's the average sleep Americans get, American teenagers get, and then athletes get? And that was the first study to pop up. My question for you is, like, I guess in that process, now that I know you were behind the scenes, how much did your jaw drop when you found out? I mean, 6 hours can't be good, right?
My mind was
blown. What does that
blown.
do to you?
My mind was blown that, that in really, as someone who thinks about human potential a lot and has been, a student athlete and has, coached student athletes for 16 years, I just am thinking, gosh, what are these athletes leaving on the table? You know, it's, and it, they're, just clearly they chronically underslept, and they're so talented, they can kind of get away with it, but what's the cost? You know, and I think that's what I worry about, and I think, female athletes are particularly vulnerable, to short, inconsistent sleep. And we have another study in review that we did in collaboration with Stanford, looking at a massive data set, and what we see is, a big culprit behind irregular menstrual cycle in length and in timing is, inconsistent short sleep. So duration is a huge factor. And then when we look at just some of these other metrics and how they behave, like heart rate variability and resting heart rate, the more variable those metrics over the course of a month. So the more variable these metrics, the more variable the menstrual cycle. We know variable menstrual cycles are not good. We want regular. So yeah, I mean, I think about, for female athletes, the kind of the cost of that, right? Because once you get into a situation where, either you stop having a period, or your period's really irregular, that has an impact on potentially future fertility, right? So yeah, it makes me, it makes me a little sad that, we're not able to create an environment for athletes whereby they're able to have enough opportunity for sleep. Because I think that's also what we saw in the study, is that, student athletes perhaps don't actually have enough time to dedicate to sleep. But a lot of that is phone use and technology, and kind of dialing in that usage is part of the equation as well. And that's obviously a lot more complicated, but yeah.
So much more we could uncover in regards to sleep, but a simple question to kind of put a button on it. To a listener out there, obviously, and you mentioned this, like sleep varies depending on person to person,
Yeah.
but ideally, if you were to be able to know that whatever advice you give here is taken and your word is the Bible, what would their sleep schedule look like in terms of like roughly when they go to bed, when they go to sleep, as well as what behaviors are they doing leading up to sleep? What does the environment look like? And what does the first hour after waking up look like?
Perfect. So we know from some research that was done out of Kenneth Wright's lab. He's a professor at Colorado. He basically took a bunch of adults who kind of identify as, morning types, and a bunch of adults who identify as evening types, and put them all on a mountain camping. And they had access only to kind of natural light. So no artificial lights at all, no technology, nothing. And what he found is that within a couple days, these morning types and evening types all fell asleep 3.3 hours after the sun went down, within 30 minutes of one another. So you asked me, when should we be sleeping? That's a rough kind of general idea of when we're naturally inclined to sleep. That's likely our natural pressure for sleep. Now, you ask people, when is your natural pressure for sleep? They have no idea, because artificial light, food, these zeitgebers, okay, the things that tell the cues, that tell our body what time it is, we can manipulate, right, due to modern society. So our bodies are so damn confused. That is, to me, the primary reason why we're in this kind of global health crisis, is because we are totally untethered from the natural or the primal thresholds of nature. We don't even know when we feel naturally sleepy. So if you want to know your natural pressure for sleep, set your alarm for a time that you can adhere to for the month. And let's say that's 7 a.m. Get up at 7 a.m. every single day for that entire month, if you can, or as close to that as you can. On weekends too. Okay. So every day of the week, and maybe just do it for a week, whatever you can do, 7 a.m. And then as soon as you wake up, you bathe yourself in as much light as possible. Artificial light, natural light, ideally, you kind of just wake your body up. And what happens is you initiate this kind of basically this cortisol awakening response. We're trying to get it to kind of happen at the same time every day, right? So that's what we're trying to facilitate with this alarm setting, is that regularity. And basically what starts happening is you start building adenosine, which is that molecule in the brain that's going to basically tell you eventually when it's time to fall asleep. So this is going to build over the course of the day. So it's, low levels, throughout the day, or, throughout the day when it's daylight. And then as nightfall starts happening, it starts building. And to a point, at the end of the day, 16 hours generally after you wake up, where it's at its peak. Okay. And then what's also coinciding with this, okay, and that's the adenosine, the sleep pressure is process S in sleep science. And process C is also kind of happening in parallel. Okay. And this is your circadian process, right? And that's, if we expose ourselves to darkness, our melatonin will start to release. Okay. So you have process S and process C basically meeting at the same time. That is your natural pressure for sleep. That is when you should go to bed. Now, no one on the planet really knows this, right? Like I don't think, like, because I ask people and they're like, they have no idea. They've never heard this before. So I think as sleep scientists, we're probably not doing a good enough job, like helping people understand that when these things meet, that's our natural pressure for sleep. Now, the cost is when we bypass this natural pressure for sleep, we don't release as much human growth hormone. We don't release as much melatonin. And when we bypass this natural pressure for sleep, all of a sudden our body feels like it's under siege. It's like, oh shit, I can't go to bed. Now I'm going to rally and I'm going to release all sorts of kind of, performance oriented hormones, and chemicals into the body. And that's why you have your second wind. And that's why you think you're a night owl. That's what's happening. You're not really a night owl. Our circadian
rhythm. There's no such thing as a night owl.
Kenneth Wright's data to me, and all the hunter-gatherer data, when you eliminate all of the traps of modern society, right, that allow us to manipulate when we go to bed, when you eliminate all of that, we're all falling asleep within 30 minutes of one another. So I don't know. I don't, and sleep scientists disagree. And I'm talking about healthy adults, not people with sleep or circadian disorders. Okay. I'm talking about just the average Jane and Joe walking around out there. I, based on what I understand of the data, I don't see huge variations in the data. The hunter-gatherer data, Kenneth Wright's data, like to me, we're falling asleep around 3.3 hours after the sun sets and within 30 minutes of each other.
Fascinating. So fascinating.
It's a preference you develop. And it honestly, it starts when you're young too. How you're socialized, the environment that you have with your parents, like how they behave, like you kind of adopt some of that. And, and frankly, there is a side of the aisle to be on, and that's the morning type. The evening types die a decade sooner, have a 10-year shorter lifespan than the morning types. So, pushing past this natural pressure for sleep, going to bed after midnight, your metabolic markers are going to be way worse, right, than a person who's going to bed before midnight. We know that there's good evidence.
For sure. Something I did want to cover before wrapping up our time here was talking about alcohol, because we briefly talked about it before we got started. What's your take on alcohol? And can you, I debate people on this all the time. I don't see, and I'm 20 years old, so I can't drink. I don't drink. I probably will never drink. And the biggest reason is because I feel like science is coming out further and further that there's no safe amount of alcohol. I've seen Huberman say it. I hate, and I don't know if you can speak into this, people say, well, you have sugar or you have coffee. And it's just like, we're talking about different worlds and different, it's like the worst type of carcinogen alcohol is.
Yeah. I mean, it's a toxin. And what we see in our data, and, I'm not talking about 13 people, I'm talking about millions of people. And, at this point, billions of sleeps. And I can tell you that even moderate amounts of alcohol are going to disrupt your sleep. They're going to disrupt your heart regulation. They're going to influence how hard you work next day and whether or not you engage in activity. And frankly, they have a greater impact on females and young adults. Young adults and females are very vulnerable from a physiological perspective. And it doesn't mean that, old guys aren't impacted. But what we see is that when you're older, your autonomic nervous system is basically less responsive to any input, negative or positive. That's also not good, right? We want to be able to very dynamically and flexibly respond to the various inputs. We want to see our resting physiology actually respond to a toxin, right? That shows that we're alive. So basically, if your body's not responding, like, you're closer to death, essentially. So anyway, we know from the data that one drink is going, within 2 hours of bedtime, is going to impact your sleep, and is going to impact markers of recovery and make you a less good version of yourself tomorrow.
You wanted to bring up the study around golf. I want to give you the space to do that before we wrap up.
Yeah. And, I think, like, when you zoom out and, like, just think about our conversation just generally, I think this study that we did on professional tour level golfers is a really good illustration of just how to think about this relationship between performance and health. So it was 5 years of data looking at almost 400 professional tour level golfers over the course of 500 events. So we have all the golf data, all of the physiological data. Okay. And what we saw is that the golfers who basically were operating on average, or were operating above their average recovery line. Okay. And recovery is a metric that we use on the Whoop platform to kind of gauge your general readiness. And the inputs that go into that are heart rate variability, are your sleep performance, your resting heart rate, and your respiratory rate. Okay. So those get mushed into an algorithm, and we get a recovery score. And so what we see is that this recovery score was predictive of how you play golf. So in not, like, when you look at it in isolation, it's not as obvious, but when you look at it over the course of 5 years, the guys that are on average above their recovery line shot 3 strokes better. So the difference was a 70 versus a 73. So the guys that were basically operating below their recovery line were 3 strokes worse. So what this study says to me is that for the individuals who are making recovery a way of being in the world, which means you're thinking about the factors, the influences that impact your ability to adapt and respond to life stressors, are going to perform better, right? I mean, you can imagine in golf how fine these margins are. Think about that study in the context of a layperson, what those margins would look like. It'd be astronomical, right? So the things that impact recovery are sickness, injury, right? Things like fever, right, will definitely impact your recovery. Alcohol, okay? Late meals, inconsistent sleep-wake time, okay? These all impact this recovery score. So if you're thinking about these things on average, right, over the course of a year, you are going to perform better. And that's the opportunity. And these aren't like crazy things, right? But I guarantee you the subset of golfers in this study who are above their average recovery line, those guys are, and this was all guys in the study, those guys are, I guarantee you, they are drinking less. They're more stable with their sleep wake time. They're thinking about their time in bed more intentionally. Okay. And as a result, they're getting sick less, right? They're more available to train and compete, which we know explains 86% of successful seasons, individual and team. And this was Ray Smith and Drew. This is a 5-year longitudinal study that was done in track, actually. Are you aware of the study?
I don't think so, no.
Oh, epic, right? Because it's this idea when you make recovery a way of being in the world, you are less vulnerable to illness and disease. I guarantee those guys who are shooting 70 on average, right, are sick less. They are more available to train and to compete, right? And if you think about this just in the context of your daily life, right, athletics aside, right, I am thinking every day about my availability. I want to be available for the things I care about. I want to be able to be available for my kids and be present and engaged. Like, I haven't been sick in 8 years. I have not had a sniffle, a cough, a headache. I'm 51 years old. I still have a regular period. Have not had one symptom of like perimenopause or whatever, like that everyone's complaining about, the brain fog and stuff. None of that, right? And maybe that's coming for me at some point. I'm sure it is, but I've been able to delay all of that because I just think about this stuff intentionally, and I think about who I want to be in the world, and I make sure that my behaviors daily support that version of myself. And that's why I get so excited about this study, because I think it just beautifully illustrates just, if we can, just make recovery a way of being in the world, we can choose our level of performance in ways that are really exciting.
Oh, love this. It's so tough because I feel like I got to get you back on because we just scratched the surface even in an hour of talking to each other. But yeah, amazing stuff. And I guess my perspective on it, thank you for sharing all those studies. I'm personally so motivated off this call to fix a lot of things in my life. I hope the people out there listening feel the same. And yeah, I mean, it's the difference between, reaching your goals in business and not reaching your goals in business. The difference between if you're a high school athlete, going Division I and setting out for that dream you set as a kid and not making it. It's the difference between winning a state championship and not winning a state championship, or being emotionally available to your partner or your kids, or not, And so I love how you kind of put that across not just sport, but also life. And I love this because I think there's a lot of, digestible things to put into action for people out there. So thank you so much for that. I got to get you back on, but you have probably wild world problems to solve that you're solving that you got to get to. So I'll let you go. Final question for you on a lighter note. It's October. The weather's finally turning. What is Dr. Holmes? You boil it down to one. What's your favorite fall product? Could be a drink, a movie, a candle. What's your fall go-to? The weather shifts and you love that part about fall.
I think it's the scent of the leaves. If I close my eyes and I'm standing in the woods, you can just smell the change, and it's one of those things where I kind of always was so scared for the winter to come. And so, I didn't want kind of summer to end. But now I really embrace it and just realize that this is it's part of the season, and it's part of the beauty of the season. So it's the smell of the leaves for sure.
I love it. Dr. Holmes, thank you so much, as always, for taking the time to chat, enlighten me. This one was a perfect mix of deep philosophy and life exploration with you, as well as deep scientific deep dives into sleep and alcohol and recovery and the whole 9 yards. But thank you always for your time. I'm always deeply blessed by it, and I know my listeners are as well.
Oh, it was my honor to be here. Thank you so much, Dominic.